The C-130's ramp lowered with a hydraulic groan, vomiting a blast of superheated, sand-choked air into the fuselage. Sergeant Anya Sharma blinked behind her regulation glasses. The sudden, oppressive light of physical blow. Below, forward operating base Kestrel shimmered in the heat haze, a miserable collection of sandbags, HESCO barriers, and sun-bleached tents squatting in an ocean of gravel and dust. It looked exactly like every other forward position she'd been to, temporary, hostile, and utterly devoid of comfort. The other passengers, a fresh rotation of young infantrymen, whooped and hollered, their nervous energy spilling out as they clattered down the ramp. Sharma moved last, her steps measured. She carried a standard duffel and a rifle, but her most conspicuous item was the hardened Pelican case clutched in her left hand. It earned her the first of the looks. The soldiers of Bravo Company, waiting to collect their new replacements, were slabs of muscle and sun-cured leather, their gear worn and personalized with extra magazines, tourniquets, and grim-looking knives. They were predators in their natural habitat. Sharma, with her slight frame, neatly pinned black hair, and the aura of a university librarian, was an anomaly. A corporal with a predator's grin and a name tape that read Diaz swaggered over to his buddies. "Hey, look what supply dropped off," he sneered, his voice carrying easily over the whine of the aircraft engines. "New librarian for the MWR tent." Laughter rippled through the group. Sharma's face remained impassive. She simply adjusted the strap of her rifle on her shoulder and continued walking toward the cluster of soldiers, her eyes scanning the layout of the FOB, noting the placement of guard towers, the location of the command post, the flow of traffic. Her mind cataloged it all automatically, a habit ingrained so deep it was an unconscious reflex. At the center of the reception party stood a man who seemed carved from granite and fury. His jaw was a block of concrete. His eyes were chips of flint, and the first sergeant's chevron on his chest seemed less a rank insignia and more a warning label. This was First Sergeant Mike "Bull" Rourke, the gatekeeper of Bravo Company. He watched Sharma's approach, his arms crossed, his expression a thunderous mask of disapproval. He saw her, and in his eyes, she was already a problem, a piece of paper from a higher headquarters that had no place in his world of blood and steel. "Sergeant Sharma?" His voice was a gravelly bark. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "First Sergeant," she replied, her own voice quiet but clear. She stopped a respectful distance from him, her posture perfectly military, yet utterly out of place among the combat-honed stances of the men around her. Rourke's eyes flicked from her face, to her clean uniform, down to the Pelican case. "Battalion says you're attached to us. Cultural and linguistic support. The orders say." He spat the words like they were poison. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I provide analysis on local atmospherics, patterns of life, and linguistic nuances that might impact operations." First Sergeant, her answer was textbook, precise, and entirely unhelpful to a man like Rourke. He grunted, a sound of pure disgust. He turned his back on her, addressing one of his sergeants. "Get the new guys squared away. Take her," he gestured vaguely in Sharma's direction without looking, "and stick her in the overflow tent." Far corner, he then stalked off toward the plywood box that served as his company headquarters, leaving Sharma standing alone in the swirling dust as the C-130's engines roared, and it climbed back into the merciless sky. The message was clear. She wasn't welcome. She wasn't one of them. She was just another piece of baggage to be tolerated. Inside the plywood box that served as the Bravo Company command post, the air was thick with the smells of stale coffee, sweat, and overworked electronics. Maps covered one wall, marked with grease pencil circles and arrows. First Sergeant Rourke sat behind a makeshift desk, a monument of contained rage. He stared at the flimsy sheet of paper, Anya Sharma's orders, as if it were a personal insult. He had spent 20 years in the infantry. He understood rifles, machine guns, mortars, and the brutal calculus of violence. He did not understand linguistic nuances. To him, it was a liability wrapped in jargon. He finally looked up as Sharma entered, her shadow falling across the floor. She had to duck slightly to get through the doorway. "Close the door," he commanded. She did so, the flimsy door shutting out a slice of the blinding afternoon sun and plunging the room into a dim, tense twilight. She stood before his desk, perfectly at ease, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Her calmness seemed only to fuel his irritation. "Sergeant," he began, leaning forward, his forearms like oak logs on the desk. "Let's get something straight. This is a rifle company. We are the pointy end of the spear. My men spend their days on patrol, looking for the man who wants to kill them. They spend their nights cleaning weapons and waiting to do it all over again. There is no room here for distractions. There is no room for people who don't pull their weight." "I understand, First Sergeant," Sharma said. Her tone was neutral, betraying no emotion. "No, I don't think you do." Rourke picked up a pen and tapped it aggressively on her orders. "This right here? This is a mistake. Some colonel in an air-conditioned office at Bagram thinks dropping a linguist into a frontline unit is a good idea. He's wrong. Out here, you're a target. You're another body I have to assign men to protect. You're a mouth to feed and a seat on a helicopter that could go to a wounded soldier." He stood up, pacing the small space like a caged bear. "I read your file. 10 years in. Signals intelligence analyst, a bunch of desk jobs at Meade and in Germany. You haven't spent a single day in a line unit. You're a REMF sergeant, a rear echelon motherfucker, and you have no place in my company." Sharma remained silent, letting him vent. Her eyes followed him, watchful and patient. It was a look that unnerved him, the look of someone observing a specimen rather than fearing a superior. "I've already made the call," Rourke said, stopping to lean over his desk again, his face inches from hers. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial growl. "I'm putting in a request to have you reassigned. Back to Bagram, where you can analyze your atmospherics from a goddamn computer screen. Until that request is approved, you are to stay on this FOB. You will not leave the wire. You will not talk to my men unless absolutely necessary. You will find a corner, open up that little box of yours, and you will stay out of my goddamn way. You are not one of my soldiers. You are a temporary problem. Am I clear?" "Crystal, First Sergeant," she replied without a flicker of defiance or fear. Her placid acceptance was more infuriating than any argument would have been. He felt a surge of contempt. He saw weakness, passivity, the bureaucratic dead weight that he had fought against his entire career. He was the guardian of his tribe, and she was an outsider who didn't understand the rights, the language, or the cost of membership. He was protecting his men from her, from the bad luck and incompetence he was sure she carried with her like a disease. "Get out," he snarled, sitting back down and pointedly picking up a stack of maintenance reports, dismissing her completely. Sharma turned and left the office, closing the door softly behind her. As she stepped back into the glaring sun, her expression was unchanged. Rourke's tirade hadn't touched her. It was just data, another variable in a complex equation. She had been underestimated before. It was a familiar, almost comfortable state of being. In her line of work, it was often an advantage. She walked toward the designated overflow tent, her pelican case held firmly in her hand. Rourke thought he was expelling her. He had no idea what he had just invited into his world. 3 days passed. Sharma was a ghost. She kept to her corner of the sweltering tent, a space she had made meticulously her own. Her cot was tight, her gear stowed with geometric precision. For hours on end, she would sit with her data slate, the screen reflecting in her glasses, her fingers occasionally tapping or swiping. The soldiers in the tent gave her a wide berth, following the first sergeant's unspoken directive. She was an outcast, the weird librarian who didn't belong. Diaz and his cronies would sometimes walk past her corner, making pointed remarks about chairborne rangers and professional briefers. But she never reacted. Her silence was a wall they could not breach. On the 4th day, the crisis arrived. Came, as it always did, disguised as routine. Battalion Intel had flagged the nearby village of Al-Kharif as a potential meeting point for a new, more aggressive insurgent cell. A reconnaissance patrol was ordered. Lieutenant Evans, young, eager, and still trying to earn the respect of men like Rourke, was tasked to lead it. In the pre-mission briefing, Evans laid out the plan. 2 squads moving in on foot with drone overwatch. A simple recon. "We go in, we talk to the elder, we take the temperature, and we come home," he said, trying to project confidence. Then came the order that made Rourke's jaw tighten. "And one more thing," Evans added, looking at his notes. "Battalion wants Sergeant Sharma to accompany the patrol. They want her on-the-ground assessment of local sentiment." A low murmur went through the room. Diaz shot a smirk across the tent. Rourke's eyes burned holes into the side of Evans's head. It was a direct contradiction of his orders to Sharma. But it came from battalion, from the lieutenant colonel. It was not a request. Rourke saw his opportunity. This was perfect. He would let her go. He would let her see what the real world was like. When she panicked, when she became a liability under the slightest pressure, he would have all the ammunition he needed to get rid of her for good. He would be proven right. He found her by her cot, checking the charge on her data slate. "You heard the LT," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "You're going for a walk. Make sure your canteen is full. It gets hot out there." "I'm aware, First Sergeant," she said, not looking up. She placed the slate into its padded slot in her assault pack, then methodically checked the action on her M4, her movements economical and sure. Rourke watched her, a flicker of something, not doubt but curiosity, passing through him before he crushed it. She was just going through the motions. Pantomime of competence. The real test was outside the wire, where the PowerPoint slides and intelligence summaries meant nothing. An hour later, the platoon moved out. The sun was a hammer. Dust coated their tongues within minutes. Sharma moved in the middle of the formation, just behind the command element with LT Evans and the radio operator. She moved with an easy, ground-eating stride that surprised some of the younger soldiers, who had expected her to struggle. She didn't speak, but her eyes were constantly in motion. They saw the village from a kilometer out, a smudge of mud brick houses in the shimmering heat. The drone feed Evans was monitoring on his own tablet showed no movement. "All clear," the pilot reported. "Pattern of life is 0, but no hostiles visible." As they entered the narrow outer street, an unnatural quiet descended. It was a silence that felt heavier than sound. No dogs barking, no children playing, no women peering from doorways, just the crunch of their boots on the gravel and the whisper of the wind through empty alleys. Sharma slowed her pace, her head on a swivel. She pointed to a wall. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice low. Evans glanced over. "What is it, Sergeant?" "That symbol. The 3 red dots in a triangle. That wasn't in the intel brief." Evans squinted. It looked like graffiti. "Probably just kids." "The paint is fresh," she countered. "And the curtains on that house, 2nd floor. They're heavy wool, for winter. No one uses those in this heat unless they don't want people seeing in. Or out." "Sergeant, we have a drone overhead," Evans said, his patience thinning. He was nervous, and her quiet observations felt like criticism. He was echoing Rourke's dismissal. "Relax. We're fine." Corporal Diaz, behind them, snorted. "Let the grunts handle it, ma'am. We know what we're looking at." Sharma fell silent, but her hand drifted to the strap of her assault pack, her fingers resting near the clasp. She scanned the rooftops, the windows, the dark spaces between buildings. The pattern was wrong. This wasn't an empty village. It was a staged village. It was a killing jar. They reached the central market square, a dusty, open area surrounded by 2-story buildings. It was the designated meeting spot with the elder who was nowhere to be seen. The silence was now absolute, suffocating. Private Chun, the platoon's newest member, shifted his weight nervously, his eyes wide. "Something's not right, sir." Specialist Grant, the quiet machine gunner, murmured to Evans. Before the lieutenant could answer, the world erupted. The first IED detonated with a deafening crack, not in the square with them, but at the mouth of the alley they had just exited, showering the street with dust and shrapnel, cutting off their primary route of retreat. A second explosion followed, sealing the far end of the square. They were boxed in. Then came the gunfire. It wasn't the sporadic chatter of a few insurgents with AK-47s. It was the coordinated, cyclic thunder of at least 3 heavy machine guns opening up from prepared positions in the surrounding buildings. Green tracers ripped through the air, chewing up the fountain in the center of the square, kicking up dirt and stone chips. Bullets whined and snapped past their heads. The platoon, trained for contact, reacted instantly, diving for the pathetic cover offered by market stalls and a low stone well. But they were reacting to a script that had already been written for them. Chaos took hold. The platoon's radio operator screamed, clutching his leg as he went down, the precious radio shattering on the stones beside him. Lieutenant Evans, frozen for a critical 2 seconds, stared at the unfolding nightmare, his mind unable to process the speed and ferocity of the attack. Diaz was on his belly, firing wild, panicked bursts at a window, his bullets sparking uselessly against the thick mud brick walls. Private Chun cried out, a round having torn through his shoulder. They were pinned, cut off, and being systematically dismantled. While the soldiers of Bravo Company were consumed by the violent chaos, Sergeant Anya Sharma was consumed by a cold, crystalline clarity. The roar of the machine guns, the snap of supersonic rounds, the screams of the wounded, it all faded into a background hum. For her, the ambush wasn't just noise and terror. It was a symphony of violence, and she could hear every instrument. She didn't reach for her rifle. A single M4 was a useless gesture against interlocking fields of heavy machine gun fire. Instead, she moved, low and fast, a gray blur against the dusty ground. She crab-crawled to the wounded radio operator, ignoring the bullets kicking up plumes of dirt inches from her body. With an economy of motion that was almost brutally efficient, she grabbed the back of his vest and dragged him, his dead weight groaning against the gravel, behind the relative safety of the stone well. She then went for Chun. The private was on his back, his face pale, his hand clamped over a gushing shoulder wound. "Don't move," she commanded, her voice cutting through his pain-filled haze. She slid beside him, ripped open her own IFAK pouch, and pulled out a tourniquet. Her hands were rock-steady as she cinched it high and tight on his arm, her movements practiced and swift. She twisted the windlass with a focused intensity, ignoring his gasp of pain. The bleeding slowed, then stopped. She packed the wound, secured the bandage, and then, with surprising strength, dragged him the last 5 feet to the cover of the well. "What the hell are you doing?" Diaz screamed at her from behind a flimsy wooden cart. "Get on your goddamn rifle." Sharma ignored him. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead. Triage was complete. The next phase was analysis. She propped herself up slightly, her head just high enough to see over the lip of the well. Her eyes weren't filled with fear. They were narrow, calculating. She wasn't looking for targets to shoot. She was deconstructing the ambush. The first nest was in the bakery, 2nd floor, eastern window. It had the widest field of fire, pinning down the bulk of the platoon. The second was in the butcher shop across the square, its fire interlocking perfectly with the first, creating a murderous crossfire. The third, she deduced from the ricochet patterns and the sound, was on a rooftop to the northwest, suppressing their only other viable exit. This wasn't a random attack. It was a professional military action. The placement of the guns, the timing of the IEDs, the choice of terrain, it was all textbook. Her textbook. She recognized the methodology. She unslung her assault pack, her movements deliberate, almost serene amidst the maelstrom. She pulled out the Pelican case, flipped the latches, and opened her data slate. The screen glowed to life. Diaz saw it and lost his mind. "Are you kidding me? You're playing on your goddamn computer? We're dying out here." She didn't even flinch. Her fingers flew across the touchscreen, which displayed a detailed satellite map of the village. She wasn't playing a game. She was waging war. Using an acoustic triangulation software she had designed herself, she began inputting data. The distinct sound of a PKM versus an RPK. The estimated distance based on the time between the muzzle flash and the sound. The trajectory of the tracers. Red icons began to populate the map, marking the machine gun nests with chilling accuracy. Then she went deeper, cross-referencing the nest locations with the likely command and control positions. An ambush of this complexity required a commander, someone calling the shots. He would be somewhere with line of sight to the kill zone but with cover and an escape route. Her finger traced a line from the nests to a single, unremarkable building behind the butcher shop. A building with a small, discreet communications antenna on the roof that the drone had missed, but that she had noted on their way in. That was him. She crawled over to Lieutenant Evans, who was still trying to rally his men, his voice strained and cracking. "Lieutenant," she snapped. Her voice was no longer the quiet analyst's. It was sharp, hard, and resonant with an authority that shocked him into silence. She held up the slate. The map glowed with her tactical overlay. "This is a coordinated trap. 3 heavy guns. The linchpin is here." She tapped the icon over the bakery. "It has the dominant fire position. We neutralize it, the geometry of their kill box collapses." Evans stared at the screen, then at her. The woman he had dismissed as a liability was now presenting him with a battlefield analysis more clear and concise than anything he had ever seen. "Give me Specialist Grant and his M249, she ordered, not requested. "The rest of your men will provide suppressive fire on these alleys." She pointed to 2 narrow corridors on the map. "To fix their flanking elements in place. Once Grant and I suppress the bakery nest, you will shift all fire to the butcher shop. We'll leapfrog from there." Her plan was audacious, precise, and delivered with an unnerving confidence that cut through the fog of war. For a moment, Evans was paralyzed by indecision. His training screamed at him to take charge, but his instincts screamed that the librarian in front of him knew exactly what she was doing. He looked at the faces of his men, scared, pinned, and losing hope. Then he looked back at Sharma's cold, determined eyes. "Do it!" he yelled, the decision made. "Grant, with me!" Grant, who had been methodically firing short, controlled bursts to conserve ammo, immediately crawled over. He looked at Sharma, then at her slate, and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. He simply nodded. "Grant," Sharma said, her voice low and direct. "On my mark, you put 100 rounds into the second-floor window of that bakery. Sustained fire. Don't stop until I tell you." She then turned to the rest of the platoon. "Everyone else, suppressing fire on the alleys. Now!" The scattered, panicked shooting of the platoon transformed. With a clear, simple task, they found their focus. They poured fire into the designated alleyways, the combined roar of their M4s creating a wall of sound. "Grant! Mark!" Sharma yelled. The M249 saw roared to life, a guttural, hammering sound that was wholly different from the enemy's guns. Grant lay prone, the weapon bucking against his shoulder as he sent a torrent of 556mm rounds into the bakery window. Wood splintered, bricks shattered, and the enemy machine gun fell silent, the gunner likely dead or diving for cover. "Shifting!" Evans screamed, following Sharma's script. "All fire on the butcher shop." The platoon's rifles swung, concentrating a storm of lead on the second enemy position. Under the cover of this new barrage, Sharma was already moving. "Grant, with me!" she commanded. They leopard crawled from the well to the flimsy cover of the overturned cart Diaz was hiding behind. "Diaz!" Sharma barked. "Give me your 203. Diaz, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, stared at her blankly. "What?" "Your M203 grenade launcher. Give it to me." Now she didn't have time to argue. She simply unclipped the launcher from under his rifle barrel with practiced ease, grabbing a high-explosive round from his vest as she did. She snapped the round into the breech, the thump-click of the mechanism shockingly loud. She didn't fire it at the machine gun nests. That was just suppression. Her target was more important. Peeking around the cart, she took aim at the building she had identified as the command node. It was a difficult shot over 150 meters with a significant arc. She held her breath, her body perfectly still. She exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The grenade launcher coughed with a dull thump. The small projectile sailed through the air in a high arc, seemingly for an eternity. Then it dropped perfectly through a window on the second floor of the target building. A beat later, a muffled explosion blew the window frame and a cloud of black smoke outwards. Silence. For a full 5 seconds, the entire village was quiet. The enemy commander was either dead or in disarray. The rhythm of the ambush was broken. The remaining 2 machine guns, their conductor gone, began to fire again, but their fire was sporadic, uncoordinated. They were no longer a cohesive unit. They were just gunmen, and they were scared. "That's it," Sharma said, her voice calm. She handed the grenade launcher back to a stunned Diaz. "Lieutenant, we move now. Bounding over watch. Grant, your point. Let's go." And just like that, the prey became the hunters. Led by a quiet analyst who had just dismantled a complex ambush with a data slate and a borrowed weapon, the battered remnants of the platoon began to fight their way out of the kill zone. Back at FOB Kestrel, First Sergeant Rourke was a storm cloud of anxiety and anger. The platoon was 3 hours overdue. All attempts at communication had failed. The drone pilot could only report that the unit was engaged in a heavy firefight in the center of the village and had taken casualties. The connection had then been lost, likely due to a malfunction or enemy action. Rourke paced the confines of the Tactical Operations Center, the radio handset clenched in his fist as if he could will it to work through sheer pressure. Every instinct screamed at him. His men were in trouble, and he was stuck behind a wall of static. Part of him, a dark, ugly part, blamed Sharma. The distraction, the bad luck charm. Her presence had somehow cursed the patrol. His earlier conversation, his attempt to expel her, now felt like a premonition. He was already drafting the report in his head, the one that would lay the blame for this disaster squarely on the desk of the battalion commander who had forced her upon him. It was then that the FOB commander, Major Jensen, burst into the TOC, his face pale. "Rourke, with me. Now." "Sir, I need to be here for when my platoon." "First Sergeant, that was not a request," Jensen snapped, his voice tight with a stress that Rourke had never seen in the mild-mannered officer before. "The CENTCOM JOC is on a priority VTC for you." Rourke's blood ran cold. CENTCOM? A video call from the Joint Operations Center for him? That made no sense. He followed Jensen at a brisk walk to the commander's private office, a slightly larger plywood box with a secure communications terminal. On the screen was the face of a full-bird colonel, his expression as warm and inviting as a glacier. The insignia on his collar was one Rourke didn't immediately recognize, a torch and a key, the emblem of the 704th Military Intelligence Brigade, a unit that officially didn't do what it was rumored to do. "First Sergeant Rourke?" The colonel's voice was flat, devoid of any pleasantries. "Sir," Rourke said, standing ramrod straight, "I am Colonel Davies, 704th MI. I'm calling about an asset attached to your company." "Sergeant Anya Sharma." Rourke's jaw clenched. This was it. The colonel must have gotten wind of his complaint. "Sir, with all due respect to Sergeant Sharma's qualifications, she is not a fit for a forward-deployed rifle company. As we speak, she is on a patrol that has gone silent after heavy contact. She is a liability we cannot afford." Colonel Davies's expression did not change, but a dangerous stillness settled over his features. "First Sergeant, let me be very clear so that there are no misunderstandings. Sergeant Sharma is not a linguist. That is her cover identity for administrative purposes. Her actual designation is Pathfinder 7. She is a senior field agent for my direct action element." The air in the small office seemed to become thin and hard to breathe. Rourke felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. Direct action element. He'd heard whispers, rumors in the NCO network about a ghost unit within MI that didn't just analyze intel. They went out and got it, often from behind enemy lines. They were spies with guns, analysts who could call in airstrikes and lead kill teams. Davies continued, his voice dropping to an icy, precise whisper that was more terrifying than any shout. Her mission, which you were not cleared to know about, is to identify, map, and ultimately dismantle the command and control network of the insurgent cell operating in your AO. A mission she was specifically requested for by name by the Office of the National Security Advisor after she successfully dismantled a similar network in the Horn of Africa last year. The mention of the NSA hit Rourke like a physical blow. This wasn't just a call from a high-ranking officer. This was a call from the stratosphere of national security, a world away from his dust-choked FOB. The president might as well have been on the line. You filed a request to have her expelled, Davies stated, not asked. You have, according to the logs, actively restricted her movements and integration. You, First Sergeant, have been obstructing a Tier 1 national security operation. Rourke felt the blood drain from his face. The librarian, the REMF he had treated with such open contempt, was one of the most critical assets in the entire theater. Sergeant Sharma, the colonel said with chilling finality, wrote the operational doctrine on identifying and countering complex ambushes for the Joint Special Operations University. The very tactics you are facing right now, she literally wrote the book on how to defeat them. If your men are in a kill box, she is the single best person on this continent to get them out. Your job was never to command her. Your job was to give her fuel, ammunition, and anything else she asked for, and then to get the hell out of her way. You are her logistical support, not her keeper. Is that understood, First Sergeant? Rourke couldn't speak. He could only manage a single, jerky nod. The world had just turned upside down. The woman he thought was a liability was the only hope his men had. He had been trying to expel a guardian angel, and he had almost succeeded. Just as Colonel Davies cut the connection, leaving his face to be replaced by a blank screen, a frantic voice crackled over the radio on Jensen's desk. Kestrel Actual, this is Bravo 2-6. We are inbound. Require immediate medical at the South Gate. I say again, Medevac, South Gate. We have wounded. It was Lieutenant Evans's voice. They were alive. They were coming home. Rourke, his mind reeling from the colonel's words, bolted from the office and ran towards the gate. His heart pounding with a mixture of relief and a new, profound sense of dread for what he was about to witness. The gate of FOB Kestrel scraped open, revealing a scene from a nightmare. The remnants of the platoon stumbled through the opening, a walking tableau of exhaustion and pain. They were covered in dust, grime, and blood. Lieutenant Evans, his face a mask of shock, was half-carrying Private Chen, whose arm was tightly bound in a blood-soaked field dressing. Other soldiers leaned on their comrades. Their gear shot up, their faces hollowed out by the ordeal. They were battered, but they were alive. Every single one of them. In the center of the formation, moving with a quiet, focused energy, was Sergeant Anya Sharma. Her uniform was torn at the shoulder, a dark stain of what looked like Chen's blood smeared across her chest. Her face was streaked with cordite, but her eyes were clear and alert. She was speaking in a low voice into a captured enemy radio, which she had apparently retuned to the medevac frequency, coordinating the arrival of the helicopter for the most seriously wounded. She held her data slate, its screen cracked but still functional, in her other hand. First Sergeant Rourke reached the gate just as they cleared it. The medics were already rushing forward with stretchers. But Rourke didn't look at them. He didn't look at the wounded. His eyes were locked on Sharma. He walked past Lieutenant Evans. He walked past a pale and shamefaced Corporal Diaz. He walked past Specialist Grant, who gave him a tired but knowing look. He walked through the scattered, wounded men of his company until he stood directly in front of Sharma. The entire area fell silent. The medics paused. The soldiers stopped. Everyone watched, sensing the gravity of the moment. Rourke was the unassailable authority on the FOB, the bedrock of Bravo Company. Sharma was the outcast he had publicly scorned. Rourke stared at her for a long second. He saw the grime, the blood, the exhaustion. But underneath it, he saw what Colonel Davies had told him. He saw the quiet, lethal competence. He saw the warrior he had been too blind to recognize. He saw the woman who had walked into hell and brought his men back with her. He didn't say a word. There were no words that could possibly suffice. Instead, he brought his heels together with a sharp crack that echoed in the sudden silence. He raised his hand to the brim of his patrol cap and rendered the sharpest, most formal, most deeply felt salute of his 20-year career. It was not the perfunctory salute a first sergeant gives a subordinate. It was the salute of a soldier acknowledging a master of his craft. It was an apology, an admission of fault, and a profound gesture of respect, all contained in one rigid, perfect motion. Sharma, seeing him, paused her radio transmission. Her eyes met his. In that brief, silent exchange, everything was understood. The dismissal, the crisis, the revelation. She returned his salute, her own gesture crisp and economical, but no less significant. The moment held, charged with the weight of all that had happened. Then she lowered her hand and turned back to the medics. The bird is 5 minutes out. Let's get Chun and Morrison prepped for transport. Her voice was all business, her focus already on the next task. The moment was over, but everything had changed. Across the small gathering, Corporal Diaz looked down at the dust on his boots, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Specialist Grant, the man who had followed her orders without question in the heart of the firefight, gave a slow, deliberate nod in her direction. The power dynamic of FOB Kestrel had been irrevocably rewritten, not by a shouted command or a display of rank, but by a quiet salute in the fading light of a brutal afternoon. Later that night, a profound quiet settled over FOB Kestrel. The generators hummed their constant, monotonous tune, a sound that became the absence of sound. The wounded had been flown out, the adrenaline had faded, and a heavy, bone-deep weariness had taken its place. In the far corner of the overflow barracks tent, a single pool of light glowed from a small camp lamp. Anya Sharma sat on the edge of her cot. In front of her, on a clean, olive-drab cloth, were the disassembled components of her data slate. She wasn't cleaning a rifle, but the ritual was the same. With a small brush and a can of compressed air, she meticulously cleaned the dust from the sealed ports. With a soft, lint-free cloth, she wiped the cracked but still luminous screen. She checked the integrity of the hardened rubber casing, running a thumb over a deep gouge left by a piece of shrapnel that would have otherwise shattered the device. This was her weapon. This was the tool that translated chaos into order, the lens through which she viewed the world. She cared for it with the reverence of a sniper for his rifle, a pilot for his aircraft. The canvas flap that sectioned off her corner of the tent rustled and was pulled aside. First Sergeant Rourke stood there, his large frame filling the opening. He was out of his body armor, dressed in a simple t-shirt and pants. He held 2 tin mugs, steam rising from them in the cool night air. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply watching her methodical work. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Finally, he stepped inside and extended one of the mugs toward her. She paused her cleaning, looked up at him, and took it. He remained standing, looking not at her, but at the canvas wall of the tent. "The intel you pulled from that ambush," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "The location of the command node, the network hierarchy you extrapolated from their tactics. Battalion is spinning up a major operation based on it. Task Force is hitting the network's core tonight." Sharma brought the mug to her lips and took a slow sip. The coffee was black, bitter, and scaldingly hot. She just nodded, letting the information settle. "My after-action report," Rourke continued, his gaze still fixed on the far wall, "will state that the patrol's survival and success was due to your direct intervention and tactical command. It'll say you operated far above and beyond your stated MOS and pay grade." He was offering to make her a hero, to publicly acknowledge his error and her prowess. She took another sip of coffee before answering, her voice as quiet as the night outside. "My report is already filed, First Sergeant." She set the mug down and picked up the main chassis of her data slate, inspecting the seals. "It states that Bravo Company's 2nd Platoon performed admirably under extreme duress. It states that Lieutenant Evans showed commendable leadership in adapting his platoon's tactics to a complex and evolving enemy action. And it states that Specialist Grant's proficiency with his weapon system was instrumental in suppressing key enemy positions. She gave no credit to herself. Not a word. She had taken her victory on the battlefield and, in the quiet of the aftermath, had given it away to the very men who had scorned her. She was rebuilding their confidence, protecting their careers, particularly the young lieutenants. She was shoring up the foundations of the unit she was attached to. Rourke was silent for a full minute, the weight of her statement sinking in. He finally turned his head and looked at her. He understood the gift she had just given him, the lesson in leadership she had just taught him without a single word of reproach. True strength wasn't about taking credit. It was about ensuring the mission's success and the welfare of the team, even when that team didn't know you were on their side. He drained his own mug in one long, decisive swallow. The sound was loud in the quiet tent. "Night, Sergeant," he said, and the words were heavy with a new, hard-won respect that had nothing to do with the chevrons on her sleeve and everything to do with the warrior within. "Night, First Sergeant," she replied, her attention already back on her work. He ducked out of her corner, letting the canvas flap fall closed, leaving her once again in her small circle of light. She clicked the final component of the data slate back into place. She powered it on. The screen flickered to life, displaying a satellite map of a new province, hundreds of miles away. A new set of patterns to decipher, a new network to dismantle. The work was never done. Outside, the stars over the high desert blazed with a cold, brilliant clarity, indifferent and eternal. Anya Sharma was exactly where she was supposed to be.